Welcome back to the Road to Great Health podcast. I'm Dr. Kevin Lenderman from South Louisiana, covering the east side of this whole program here, and I'm joined by Dr. Rob DeMartino out of Las Vegas, covering the west half of the country. Doc, what's up today?
Hey, West Coast in the house. We're good, man. How you doing?
That's good. So, we did our very first podcast on energetic debt. And we've done, this will be number 29. We've done 28 podcasts since then. And so we were talking before the show. I want to go back and review all of that again because I've been watching your socials and I've been hearing you talk more and more about mitochondrial health and energetic debt. And I think this podcast, we should go back over that. And for those of you listening, some of these podcasts, we try to get very sciencey. We get deep into the details of all the cellular biology of what we do. Some of them, we talk about specific conditions like endometriosis or POTS or autoimmune. And then some of them, we like to sort of pan out to a more of a 30,000 foot view of why people are healthy or not. And so that's what this is going to be. And so, and I think that's good because, you know, you have some people that are more the sciencey type people that like to know all the details. That's where we would lean towards Dr. Rob. Uh, and then you have some people that just want to know kind of the bottom line where it's like, hey, doc, can you fix me? That's more where I would lean. And so hopefully you guys are getting both sides of that. But you know, doc, I've been hearing you talk a lot about mitochondrial health on your social media.
Yeah, it's kind of the forefront of everything right now. I mean, they've linked so many diseases back to mitochondrial dysfunction, the way that mitochondria are working or not working correctly, and it's getting to the point now where even just like general Google, right? But you have to ask these really specific questions, right? So if you put in mitochondrial damage or dysfunction and X, Y, and Z disease, you're typically going to find like, oh, it's linked or it's triggered or it's pathogenesis, right? There's always these linked back to these things. And it's been underserved so much in both traditional conventional medicine and even alternative medicine because
Yeah.
mitochondria act as an energetic function, right? So while both of those are great, they still sit in the lines of chemistry, right? Where
Yeah.
we're always trying to alter chemistry. And I've always used the analogy of, nobody has a check engine light that comes on and says, oh, I have to go put premium gas in, right? That's not the
Right.
solution to an engine problem, right? You have to actually fix the engine itself. So it's amazing how much of the science actually leads back to that. But then there's not very much conversation about, oh, well, that's what you do about it. Right.
Right.
That's, I spent my morning fighting with gynecologists online this morning about this because they saw a lot of my endometriosis stuff. And like, well,
Yeah.
there's nothing to show that mitochondria have anything to do with this, and some of them are nice and some of them are like, prove me wrong type of thing. But it's just logical common sense, right? Like, so take endometriosis, right? We just did that podcast last week, right? There's
Yeah.
three major inflammatory markers that we get that's accepted. Okay, these are the inflammation markers that drive endometriosis. Where do they come from inside the body? They come from the mitochondria of your immune system cells, right? So this isn't, they're like, show me the papers. Is it papers or is it common sense at a certain point? Right now, again, you have to understand
Right.
the science. You have to know the science and know to ask that. But if these are
Yeah.
the three markers that you agree upon drive endometriosis, and every bit of science says it comes from the mitochondria, then doesn't it make sense that the mitochondria is the problem? Right? Right? Because you're
Yeah.
treating that. Well, in endometriosis, they don't really treat that, but in other autoimmunes, they'll treat that, but they don't actually then relate it back towards mitochondria. Because, and again, at the end of the day, he said, all the things that they do to fix mitochondria don't do anything with that. Well, of course they don't, because you're just trying to give them chemicals, right? You're just trying to give them drugs. You're just trying to give them things. You're just trying to give them natural stuff. That stuff doesn't fix mitochondria, right? Like, again,
Yeah.
premium fuel is not going to fix my engine if it's broken. They need different types of fixes. So it is wild how much, and again, this isn't my idea. Like I would, I'm very much about giving credit where credit is due, right? Like I read a lot of the science, but I didn't research any of this myself, right? All of this stuff is done by these brilliant third-party scientists where they link all these things back and just these really powerful research studies that they put out. It just hasn't really hit mainstream yet. I'm starting to see that mitochondria gets attention, like people know what you're talking about, right? I'm sure you get that too, right? When you say mitochondria, people
Yeah.
kind of know now, right?
Yeah. It's really funny too because I'm sure when people watch our socials, they're like, these guys try to boil everything down to the mitochondria, and we're like, you're getting it. You're finally
Yeah.
understanding.
I do have somebody who's chasing me around on socials who did say that. They're like, you think everything is mitochondria. I'm like, well, not everything, but the diseases that I've spoken about so far, yeah.
Right.
Right. Like I didn't talk about I haven't talked about every disease, but the ones that we kind of bring up, yeah, that's their origin to them. And again, you don't need to take my word for it. Just Google it out, right? Hey, mitochondrial disease or mitochondrial damage and dysfunction and X, Y, and Z disease, and tell me you don't find like hardcore NIH, PubMed third-party research that says, yeah, there's a relationship, and it's usually a pretty significant one. It's not like, yeah, it's involved. It's like it's
Yeah.
the driver. It's the
Yeah.
main thing, and it's so yeah, it seems overly simplistic, but not when you talk about the fact that you have like, whatever it is, 11 quintillion mitochondria in your system, right? It's a
Pretty
fairly
important.
big part of what your body is, right? They make up 30% of your dry body weight, right? So if you took your mitochondria and you broke them down and you took out the fluid inside the body, they make up 30% of your dry body weight, right? So this is, it would be like your skin, right? But you can't,
Right.
it doesn't look like that. It's not continuous, but they make up a tremendous amount of parts of your body. So yeah, it makes only sense that they're going to be a big driver.
Yeah. And the way that we talk about this in layman terms whenever Dr. Rob and I are talking to patients is a term that he coined called energetic debt. And so if you think about your bank account, you have to deposit more money than you spend. And as long as you do that, your bank account is healthy. But when you start spending more money than you're depositing, now your bank account, you're spending in debt. And when your mitochondria become dysfunctional, your body goes into energetic debt and things will start to fail after that. And so when we talk about energetic debt and mitochondrial dysfunction, it's basically the same thing. One is just a layman term where we can describe what's happening to anybody, to the person that doesn't really understand the terms like mitochondrial health, and where anyone can understand that. All of us have spent more than we've deposited in our bank account at some point. And so
Definitely,
that's
yes.
what your body will do. Yeah. And so that is really the beginning of almost every chronic disease, as at some point your energy system got dysfunctional, it dug itself a hole, and it can't climb out of that hole. Now, I don't care what you label that hole. You could call it holitis syndrome. But the question is, how do we dig you out of it? And it really boils down to getting your mitochondria functioning better throughout your whole body.
Yeah, it's such a primal thing, right? So we'll say, oh, you're having kidney problems. Well, what makes your kidneys work? Well, they need energy and they need production of this fuel that your mitochondria make in order for them to work. Like, what is heart failure? Right? Your heart doesn't have enough energy to work the way that it's supposed to, so the engine fails, right? So
Mhm.
at the end of the day, every single aspect of your body, your eyes seeing, your heart beating, your liver detoxing, your kidneys getting fluid out, all of these things require energy. And, it's a significant amount. You're talking about a 150-pound person who lives a relatively sedentary lifestyle needs to make like 180 pounds of ATP a day, which is the cellular form of energy that our body uses. So you have to make more than your body weight in energy every single day just to run the stuff. And that's if you're not doing much. Then you compound the lifestyles that we have and the stress and everything else along those lines. Now all of a sudden there's this huge energetic need. But again, when you break the body down to very fundamental ideas of what we're capable of doing and what we're not capable of doing, they are dependent upon one very specific thing, and that's energy. That is why the most Googled health problem is chronic fatigue, right? And I always laugh because people are like, well, chronic fatigue is so mystical. Like, what causes chronic fatigue? Well, it seems kind of straightforward, right? I mean, it seems like if you don't have enough energy, right, you look at the place in your body that generates energy.
Yeah.
Like, and again, now there's
Right.
no marker necessarily for that. I had a good question on social the other day. Somebody asked me, like, why do you think there's not great testing for mitochondria? And I'm like, well, I think there's a bit of that that's purposeful, to be honest with you, right? I think that'll maybe change in the next 5 or 10 years just because they're not going to be able to push back against it. But I mean, again, if you start driving back and then you say, okay, now we've always believed that these problems are genetic, and now we're finding out that they're energetic and they're mitochondrial, it's a cataclysmic shift to the system, right? You're talking about like rescinding Nobel Prizes. And I don't know how nefarious all that stuff is, but all of a sudden it would be an admission of, wow, we've been wrong for a really, really long period of time.
Yeah. And mitochondrial dysfunction even goes as far as things like brain health problems, especially because your brain is, I think, 20% of your body weight, or I'm sorry, it uses 20% of your energy, and it's 2% of your body weight. So just like in this bank account analogy, your mortgage is your biggest note, your biggest bill. Your brain is your body's biggest expenditure other than making new cells every day. And so your brain is very sensitive to a loss of energy. Depressions, anxieties, brain fogs, dementias, all of those things have to do with, does your brain have enough energy to run?
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and to that point, we always are very systematic about how we look at it. It's like, okay, so if there's a problem with the brain, if somebody's having brain fog or something like that, okay, so it's got to be the brain itself. But when you step back and you think about it from the energetic model, like what you just described, so think of your brain as like the CEO, but he just takes a percentage of the profits of the business, right? So if the business profits $1 million and he takes 20% of that, okay, well, he's going to get 20% of $1 million, and he's going to get $200,000. But if the business only profits $500,000, right? Because now the body can only make half of the amount of energy, the brain's still going to take 20%, but now his percentage is not as high, right? Because he's taking 20% to 500,000, right? So he's only getting $100,000. So he literally got halved. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the brain isn't being able to make that much energy, but it could be someplace else. So say the heart's not able to do it, or say the liver's not able to do it. Say there's an energetic drain somewhere else in the system. The brain will absolutely feel that because this is a collective, right? Again, it's one of my big things we always complain about with conventional is they look at the body as very pieces that don't have anything
Yeah.
to do with each other. Well, that has nothing to do with that. Sure, it does, right? Because if it takes 20% of the metabolic activity and that metabolic activity drops by half, that 20% drops by half. And then all of a sudden, brain fog may have nothing to do with your brain. That headache may have nothing to do with your brain. It may have energetic debt someplace else in your system, right? I think the big thing with energetic debt too is thank God. I mean, right? Because you've got all these mitochondria in your system. Not all of them dysfunction,
Right.
right? A percentage of them dysfunction, right? And that's the thing. As that percentage gets bigger in certain areas, then we start getting more dysfunctions. You get more things that don't work, and then eventually we start getting diagnoses.
Yeah. Interesting. And so I was doing a teaching a class last night, and I was making the point that, one of the most just shocking things that we had ever talked about. I remember this the first time I ever heard you say this. It was I was just blown away about how there's every kind of cancer in the body. You've got bone cancer, skin cancer, lung cancer, blood cancers, bone cancers, but there's no such thing as heart cancer. So talk to me about that.
Yeah. So your heart is by far and away your most electrical organ. And one of the things that mitochondria do for our cells is when they are working well, they create cellular voltage, right? So think of it like a battery charge, right? Just like charging your cell phone, right? It's the charge of the battery. So when your cells are fully charged, they're very capable of using oxygen, right? So because your heart is so electrical and they have so many mitochondria, it keeps that charge up so high that it's not possible for that voltage to fall low enough or for us to damage that enough to where we would get something that would be considered cancer. The heart will fail,
Yeah.
right? So that's why we get heart failure, right? We don't get brain cancer. We get brain cancer. We don't get brain failure, right? The heart will fail because the electricity that it can generate and the power that it can generate, when it loses it, it's not enough to get to cancer, but it will be enough where the organ actually doesn't physically work. I think there's like 3 cases in history where they've even found like on autopsy, they found like a tumor on somebody's heart or something like that, but it
Yeah.
wasn't the thing that killed them. It is basically a very simple, elegant analogy to point out the fact that the mitochondria that create voltage do play a role in all of these immune system disorders all the way down the line.
Yeah. And we did a series of podcasts on the science of all of this, and we called it the 4 pillars of human health. And what Dr. Rob also coins 5 Archimedes levers. And if you guys are one of those that want to dive deep into us talking about the science, you can start at podcast number 15 and go to 22. We talk about heteroplasmy rates and redox potentials and all those kind of science bases of what we're talking about. And so we're really talking more in generalities today, and more like energetic debt terms. But there there is hardcore science to back up everything that Dr. Rob is talking about. And we've talked about that science before. And you're welcome to go back and listen to those podcasts if you want to dig deep into that. I mean, I think that was what, like 4 hours of podcast or something like that
Yeah.
that we
Had to have
did
been,
on the
right?
science behind, yeah, on the science behind all this. So
Yeah, we give you that if you want it, right? I mean,
right.
it's unfortunate, right? We know so much about the science, and this is relatively complicated, but we need to just know enough to be able to move ourselves forward to really answer the question: okay, what's causing this? What can we do about it? Where do we maybe need help from the outside? And I think that's ultimately kind of where it comes down to, and why we wanted to do those podcasts. But you know, and everyone was asking me like, well, where'd you hear like a lot of this stuff? So one of the main guys is a guy named Doug Wallace. Doug Wallace did a lot of the big research around all of these different ideologies, and then he's had several proteges with him, guys gals who worked on his team who've kind of splintered off and done other really cool research. But he was the first guy who really started to talk about this, because he really took us from this model of what they call genetic determinism, right? So you don't know what that means, but as a patient, you know what that means. You say, well, your father had high cholesterol, so you have high cholesterol, right? You're genetically screwed, right? You're going to get it because you're genetically there. Versus where Wallace talked about the fact of like, well, no, your genetics that you will get from mom and dad in your nuclear DNA is going to determine what disease you will get. But the genetics in your mitochondria, your mitochondrial DNA, which again was not known until really 40-ish years ago, but really within the last 20, that's going to determine whether or not you get the disease. And they did really interesting studies. They did studies, it was 2016, they did a study with lupus where they would have damaged nuclear DNA and damaged mitochondrial DNA. And they would take out the damaged nuclear DNA and they would put it in a healthy person, and the person would be well. But then they would take the damaged mitochondrial DNA and then they would put that in a healthy person with healthy nuclear DNA, and the person would instantly get sick. Right. So when so everyone's like, well, how do you know that? Well, it's really pretty simple. When that's how you would test something like that. And they did this work already, right? So if you take this out and you put in healthy nuclear DNA with damaged mitochondrial DNA, the person stays sick. If you take the mitochondrial DNA out that's damaged and you put in healthy versions and you have damaged nuclear DNA, the person still stays well. So at the end of the day, it's like a process of elimination. It's a beautiful scientific study. And I have links to that on my site if anyone's really curious about reading the hardcore portions of that. But I mean, like I said, it is that level of detail that we're talking about. Now, can we measure that and, send you to the LabCorp and request and get that done? Unfortunately, no. But it's on us as doctors to know that, so that we can work our way backwards and saying, okay, if you have this problem, it means the mitochondria is damaged here. These brilliant researchers did that work for us. Now we have to figure out the pattern of how that happened, why it happened, and what can we do to turn that thing around? What can you do to turn that thing around too? So it's all about pattern recognition for right now until the testing keeps up.
Yeah. Doc, I had a patient yesterday that came in that she was so energetically in debt she could barely lift her head. I mean, she was talking slow. Was moving slow. I mean, she was completely collapsed energetically, and her medical doctor told her she needed to exercise. It's like this lady can barely make it to the car to come into the office, and your recommendation is burn more energy. And she was just so thankful when I told her that. Like, it made so much more sense to her than, you expect me to go exercise feeling like this? Like, that's not, that's not, they told her to lose weight and exercise. And
Yeah.
she was so
It,
thankful to have someone go, that makes no sense.
Yeah, because it doesn't. I mean, obviously we want to play on the science end of things, but there's a logic to all of this
Right.
as well too. Now, and again, it kind of goes back. One of the other big disciples of Doug Wallace is a guy named Martin Picard. He's putting out a lot of really interesting research about this as well, and he talks about the fact that basically right now we have two different types of sciences, right? You have healthcare, which essentially is sick care, right? And there's a place for sick care, right? God forbid you get shot or something, like don't come to our offices, go to the emergency
Right.
room. Like that's not what we do. So you have emergent care, right? But that ultimately is sick care. And then you have preventative care. And somehow we've convinced the world that alternatively is the idea of being preventative versus waiting till you get sick. But I'll save that soapbox for another day. But you've got sick care, you've got preventative care. But then what happens in the middle? right?
Yeah.
So what if you're sick? Now you're using preventative care, which is a strategy like, well, yeah, exercise prevents you from getting sick, but it doesn't get you well, right? So
Right.
we missed this gap very strongly in the middle of saying, well, yeah, we're going to do all these preventative ideologies, and it's because again, it's not to say that exercise is bad, but you're not going to exercise yourself out of that problem, right? You're not going to exercise yourself out of rheumatoid arthritis. You're not going to exercise yourself if your engines are broken, like you said. Stressing them doesn't make anything better, right?
Right.
It doesn't. It makes it worse. You break your engines more. So at the same time, what we're trying to essentially, I guess, create a new genre of health here is like, this healing ideology in the middle, right?
Yeah.
These healing sciences of how do you fix this? Then you can do alternative care where you're like, okay, let's prevent this, right? That's
Yeah.
the ideology. And I would love to at some point get us to the place where, hey, we're just taking on preventative patients. Like, how do we get to that point? We're mired in the, we're trying to get people out of this problem, right?
Yeah.
Last ditch efforts to try to get them out. But it's an illogical premise to tell somebody like, but again, they're not looking at it from the fact that their mitochondria are broken, right? They're not
Hmm.
looking at it that it's an engine that you don't want to push a race car that's into a red further in the red, right? You will blow that engine, right? You will blow that engine and you will blow it at some point. I had a guy, this is a while ago, and I told him, I'm like, look, this is bad. Your markers do not look good, and your cardiac is in danger. And he told me, I'll be fine. Okay. I said, I've said my piece. I'm making my statement that I think this is a bad idea, but you do whatever you want. He showed back up. It wasn't even like 6 months later. And he's like, go ahead, tell me I told you so. Because he had a heart attack. Right. And I'm like, look, I'm not happy to be right here. Right. This is the one time in my life I'm not happy to be right. And he's like, so I was thinking more about what you said and it makes sense. Right. I'm like, but you can't keep pushing this. Right. The body is sending you all these signals like, this is bad. Like, don't do this. Right. These are all these signals. Like, don't do it. But it's this mentality of like we can push through it, but then eventually that bill is going to come due, and thankfully then we work to start getting everything fixed up, and then he's okay. But 50% of the times when guys have a heart attack, that's it. 50% of the times the first sign of a heart disease is you're dead from that heart attack, and for women that number is 60%.
Yeah.
60% of the time when they have their first heart attack, they die, right? So they have less of it, right? But it still all comes down to these ideologies, and we need to be actively, proactively doing things to build our energy, right? In the past, we could probably sit on that. Our lifestyles were more conducive towards it. The drain on our energy wasn't as strong. Now, if you're not doing things to build your energy, like somebody last time, if you're not on the offensive to try to build your energy, you will run out of it before you want to.
Yeah, with just the world we're in today, you have to aggressively work on your energy system, or it will get drained faster than your body can make it. So it's something that you have to aggressively work on. I really like what you said right there, Doc, about traditional American medicine is kind of here and preventative is kind of over here, and we're not really either one of those. We're kind of in the middle. I've never really thought about that before, but I like it because we use a lot of hardcore American medical diagnostics, and so you could take that and then work on these problems from an energetic debt framework, and do a lot of good getting people out of an emergency situation or a chronic disease situation. So I really like that concept.
Yeah, I stole it from Martin Picard, so I got to give him credit
Yeah.
again. Where I heard him say
Yeah.
that on an interview, but it's really true because you get all of these, and that's where you find, like, when you look at the comments on socials, and it's like, okay, where are people stuck? Like, where are they stuck? Because they don't know what to do, right? Like, so many of the things they're talking about is we're trying to do prevention. And again, there's a great strategy, but then on the other side of it, like, we have to do stuff before you can get to prevention. You have to have something to prevent. If you're already sick, you're past prevention, right? But then they're stuck with sick care, right? They're stuck with these different types of things, or I'm taking these meds to, like, try to decrease my inflammatory stuff. And now I mean, it was funny because I was bringing some research together. I use AI a lot to help me cite research together, right? To put concepts together and bring something together. And now one of the big AI engines over the last couple of weeks went through I don't know, an update or whatever they would call it, and now it won't let me write a lot of content. Like, it won't pull a lot of the content for me because it tells me it's a misinformation, and Despite the fact that it's great because it brings me all of the scientific research that proves my point, but then it says it won't put the content together for me because it's misinformation. And then even if it does write it for me, it literally will say like, but drugs are really good. The drugs can be really, really helpful for you. It actually stated in one of the things I had to laugh to myself because it literally stated, taking the drug to silence the inflammation that your mitochondria is putting out to basically call for help. It would be like there being a major fire and shutting off the fire alarm, which is genuinely helpful. How the hell is that genuinely helpful? Like not letting somebody know that there's a fire is genuinely helpful. I mean, maybe it's genuinely helpful that their ears don't hurt from the alarm, but they die in the fire or they suffer in the fire. I mean, I was so blown away by this that I'm like, oh my God, like this is where we are. And so I laugh. I'm like, yeah, I spend most of my time fighting with people, just about trying. And I'm like, because these actually concepts are very simple and the process of doing them are very straightforward. It's just trying to cut through all of the noise to try to get to this basic idea. Because like I said, we joke around all the time, like, well, this is when you say the word cause, it's like a throwaway word. It's almost like wellness now. Like wellness, like
Yeah.
people are like, why do wellness? What do you do? I do Botox injections. Okay, not what I would consider wellness, right?
Right.
So it
Right.
becomes this like massively weird term, but at the same time, I think cause has kind of gotten in there because when you really define cause and effect, it has to be very specific, right? It may not be 100%, but we'll play the 80-20 law 80% of the time, right? So if heavy metals cause this disease, that means you would find the same metal, not any of them, right? That's not cause and effect, not just heavy metals, a heavy metal in the same disease 80% of the time that directly causes that disease. And then when you remove that metal, the disease goes away. And do we have that? No. Now, am I saying that heavy metals are awesome for you? No, right? So you do want to get them out? Yes, absolutely. You want to get them out. They're not going to be good for your health. But to state that they are causation, right now there's this huge thing about, oh, it's infectious, right? It's the infections that are damaging your mitochondria. Again, do I wish it was that? Sure. Because then all you had to do was kill the infection and then the disease would go away, right? You don't have like an unlimited amount of Epstein-Barr virus in your system. So you know what I'm saying? Like when you look at some of that sort of stuff, it's very weird when you get that perspective of cause and effect. But we go back to those mitochondria things. You take that mitochondria out, you put good ones in, person gets well. Now again, we're not to the point where we can do that. Maybe at some point they will be able to. That'd be cool if they do that in my lifetime. But at the same point, if we can repair that, that's the apex of everything. And then all of a sudden everything else is going to get better. But there will be things that the person will be responsible to do in order to keep that good. Right. And that's what all those podcasts that we did, we're talking about like, hey, what do you do? How do you start doing this? Right. So I think that's why, this information is so important. And some of the times we have to cycle back because it's fun to talk about conditions. Obviously, it's fun for me to talk about the science, probably not for anybody else. But these kind of podcasts are important because these are core ideologies. Then you realize, wow, the belief structure is what's holding me back, not the actual science or the
Right.
application.
Right. Now, Doc, I wanted to get into a little bit about the human cell, and at some point in way back in our history, like way back,
Way
the
back.
mitochondria was actually a bacteria. And when the oxygen of the earth changed, somehow that bacteria found a home inside a cell and started making energy. And so, talk a little bit about how our mitochondria is bacteria based or bacteria origin, and tell me what you know about that.
Yeah. So it's somewhere about 2 or 3 million years ago the oxygen of the earth spiked, right? It went up. Now, oxygen is toxic to bacteria, right? So, in order for bacteria to survive, what happened is two different types of bacteria had to literally join forces. So now we don't know if like one ate the other one and it just worked out well, or they actually like decided, hey, we should team up. But they teamed up in one way or the other to be able to handle this high level of oxygen. And when it was able to handle this high level of oxygen, all of a sudden the amount of energy output that it could put out was significantly greater, which is how we started to evolve and become more advanced beings over the course of time through the evolution of that. But it became like the greatest partnership in history where they teamed up, then they got into our cells and they teamed up with our cellular structures. So now we help provide them with things that they need. And they provide us with all of this energy to run our system to the levels of doing all of the complex things that we do today. So, which is why we, obviously Neanderthals weren't talking the same way that we are. We obviously move up to this point where we're doing all these things. But what it means is ultimately is that mitochondria are bacterial in origin, which means if you take things like antibiotics that kill bacteria, they will damage your mitochondria.
Right.
Right. That's the
That was the
reality
point
of
I
it.
wanted to get to. Yeah.
Is that where you wanted to go? Okay, good. Go. Yeah. So
That's where I wanted to get to.
because
And here's the other point with that too. If I added up all of the antibiotic prescriptions and I put them in a pile, that pile would be the size of this building that I'm in. That's 20% of the use of antibiotics. The other 80% goes into agriculture and food supply. And so all of the antibiotic prescriptions added up in one pile is small in comparison to how much antibiotics goes into animals, agriculture, and food supply. So if you've eaten, you may have taken in antibiotics, even if you haven't taken a prescription of antibiotics, and those things damage your mitochondria.
Yep. And I mean, the ideology of getting a diagnosis of ANA, like anti-nuclear antibody, if you go back in history with those people, at some point in their lifetime, I promise you, they took a tremendous amount of antibiotics. It's almost always, if it's not 9 times out of 10, it's higher than that. But there will be an antibiotic use. They had strep or staph or tubes or ear infections, whatever. They took a tremendous amount of antibiotics, and that will trigger an ANA response eventually at some point. But that is antibiotic typically driven. There's other meds that can do it too, but that's how they get that autoimmune. It's still mitochondrial damage, but the damage was from an antibacterial, not looking at the fact that mitochondria are bacterial in origin.
Wow. That's all so fascinating.
Yeah,
I would have
it
loved
kind
to
of
have
always
been
goes back
looking
to
under.
that.
I would have loved to have been looking under a microscope when all that happened. Back in the day.
Oh yeah, I mean, oh yeah. If there was time machines, I would love to go back and like watch how that all went down. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
an interesting event of how we got here, and I can think history and science is important because they will merge that way. But I mean, eventually, at some point, the science got hijacked by this
Yeah.
chemical model and this model of antibiotics, and we've been down that path. And look, I mean, the reality of it is methotrexate, the medication that they use for rheumatoid, was found in 1955. Do you know when the first diagnosis of rheumatoid was? 1956.
56. I guessed that one. 56. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, yeah, right. Because where
Yeah.
I'm going, right? So
Yeah.
what's the joke is like conventional medicine is always the leading cause of coincidence.
Right.
So
Yes.
yeah, I mean, so you start all of a sudden start to bring up these ideologies, but again, that stuff has been buried. But it's going to break through, right? The science is inevitable. Science is
Yeah.
inevitable. It's going to break through. We're finding more and more people knowing about what we're talking about now, and that's the idea. But once we can start actually fighting through the noise and just focusing on, hey, look, these are what you need to do to get yourself out of this hole. That's what brings people home.
Yeah. Well, man, that was great. And so here's the bottom line with all of this, guys. If you don't solve your energetic debt, you likely won't solve your health problems. And if we can solve your energetic debt, the chances of us getting you over your health problem increase exponentially. Because once your body has enough energy to run all of its systems and heal and repair and make new cells and make new tissue and make things start working again, at that point it's just what do we need to fix in what order. But if you're stuck in energetic debt, you could be at the best doctor in the world with the best diet in the world, running a triathlete, being a triathlete every day, and you are not going to get better because your body has to have more energy to run all of its systems than it makes. And that's the primary goal. That's step number one with Dr. Rob's program is how do we fix the energy system of the body? Did I say that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we need even more energy than that to heal, right? Because now you
Yeah.
got to catch up, right? So
Yeah.
if you're healing, it's just a matter of time. That's going to take enough time for the body to heal those things up to put you over the edge.
Yeah, just like in your car to go from 40 miles an hour to 60, it takes more gas. Well, if you're at this level of health and you're trying to get to this level of health, you're going to need more energy to move up. If you're treading water here, you're never going to get to here. And so that's the goal of this podcast is to teach you about all that. And it's the goal of our in-office care in order to try to actually achieve these things. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on podcast number 29. Next week, we're going to hit the big 3-0. Dr. Rob, man, I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, and I will talk to you guys next week.